This episode, Longevity and Gut Health, the original biohacker from the Axiom and Vessel series, is brought to you by Vizgard Studio.
I want to start with a mental image. Picture a man standing in front of a mirror in Paris, roughly around 1900. He is arguably one of the most famous scientists on Earth. He shares a stage with giants like Louis Pasteur. He is a Nobel Prize winner. He is the toast of the intellectual town. But he is looking at his own reflection, and he is absolutely terrified.
Terrified of what? Losing his reputation?
No, terrified of aging. He sees the wrinkles forming, the gray hair, the slight loss of vitality, and to him it doesn't look like a natural process. It doesn't look like the inevitable turning of the seasons. To him it looks like a disease. It looks like a mistake.
That is a very specific and somewhat dark way to view your own mortality as a design flaw.
Exactly. This is Ilya Mechnikov. And to understand the story we are telling today, you have to understand that this wasn't just a scientist dispassionately looking at data points on a chart. This was a man who was obsessed, borderline neurotic, honestly, about the idea that human beings are broken machines.
And not just broken. Disharmonious, that was his word, right?
Disharmony. That is the key word for this entire episode. Today, if people know him at all, they know him as the yogurt guy. The eccentric figure who told the Victorians to drink sour milk to live forever. But that is such a tiny, almost cartoonish sliver of the story. We are doing a deep dive into the man who essentially invented the concept of biohacking 100 years before Silicon Valley even existed.
It really is the origin story of the modern wellness industry.
Yeah.
But usually when we talk about Victorian medicine, we're talking about, leeches, ghosts in the blood, balancing humors. We're talking about absolute nonsense.
Right. And that is the core conflict we are exploring. Was Mechnikov a mad scientist who led us down a century-long garden path of colonic cleanses, detox teas, and quackery? Or was he a prophet who saw the microbiome revolution coming a century too early?
Because when you look at the sources we have for today, and we have a massive stack of them, it is shocking how close he got.
We are going to stress test his ideas. We aren't just doing a biography. We are taking his 1908 theories, his specific claims about why we age, and we are crashing them into 2022 and 2023 data. We are talking about worms living longer on pickle juice bacteria.
Right.
We are talking about mice regaining youthful virility from breast milk bacteria. And we are talking about the physics, the actual fluid dynamics of how probiotics fight the flu.
The pickle study is particularly wild, and the mouse study, well, let's just say it redefines anti-aging in a very measurable way.
We will get to the pickles and the mice. But before we get to the solution, we have to understand the problem as Mechnikov saw it. We have to understand disharmony, because he didn't just look at the human body and see a miracle of evolution. He saw a mess.
He did. And this is where his background as an evolutionary biologist comes in. You have to remember, Darwin's On the Origin of Species was published in 1859. Mechnikov is working in the wake of that. He looked at humans and saw a creature that had evolved a massive, complex brain, a creature capable of poetry and calculus, but one that was still lugging around primitive biological structures that no longer made sense.
He was basically saying we're like a brand new Ferrari engine dropped into a horse-drawn carriage. The parts don't match.
That is a great analogy. He argued that we have inherited organs that were useful for our animal ancestors, for survival in the wild, but are actually harmful to modern civilized humans. And public enemy number one, the absolute villain in his story, the large intestine.
The colon.
The colon. To Mechnikov, the colon was not a helpful organ for water absorption or electrolyte balance. He called it a vestigial cesspool.
A cesspool? He really didn't mince words.
He hated it. He argued that the large intestine evolved for mammals that needed to run from predators without stopping to defecate. If you are a gazelle running from a lion, you can't stop to use the bathroom. You need a holding tank, a reservoir. But for civilized man, he called it certainly useless.
Certainly useless. That is a hot take on an organ we now know is pretty important.
It is a scorching hot take. But his logic was that this cesspool was a reservoir for putrefaction. It was just a bag where bacteria sat around rotting food, creating toxins that seeped into the body. This is the foundation of his theory of aging. He believed we were rotting from the inside out.
Okay, hold that thought on the rotting, because that is the core mechanism we need to debunk or prove later. But I want to back up to how he even got to this point, because before he was the sour milk guy, and before he was the colon hater, he was the starfish guy. This is the origin story.
This is the eureka moment, is 1882. Mechnikov is in Messina, Italy.
Why Messina?
He was sort of drifting. He had resigned from a university post in Russia due to political turmoil, which we will get to, and he set up a private lab in his living room in Italy. He was a zoologist. He was observing starfish larvae under a microscope.
And these larvae are transparent, right? That's important.
Crucially important. You could see right through them. So the story goes, his family had gone to the circus. He stayed home to look at his starfish. And he has this sudden, intuitive idea. He walks out to his garden, grabs a tangerine tree, and plucks a rose thorn, just a splinter.
A rose.
He takes this thorn and he inserts it into the body of this tiny, transparent starfish larva.
He's poking it. He wants to see what happens when you introduce a foreign object.
Exactly. Now, up until this point, the prevailing medical theory was that the body was passive. If you got sick or injured, your body just existed. Maybe the blood had some chemical properties that resisted disease, but it was a passive chemical reaction, like acid-dissolving metal.
So he expects the larva to maybe die, or maybe the thorn just sits there?
Right. But the next morning, he looks at the microscope and he sees something incredible. He sees that mobile cells inside the larva cells that normally just float around had swarmed the thorn. They were surrounding it. They were attacking it. They were trying to devour it.
And this is the discovery of phagocytosis.
Yes. From the Greek phagos, to eat.
Yeah.
He realized that the body has active defenders. We have an army. We have cells that hunt. This was the birth of cellular immunology.
Which is a huge deal. I mean, that eventually wins him the Nobel Prize in 1908. So we have to establish that Mechnikov is a heavy hitter. He is not some fringe crackpot selling snake oil out of a wagon. He is sharing the stage with the biggest names in science history.
Absolutely. But even then, he was a fighter. There were the antibody wars going on at the time.
The antibody wars, it sounds like a sci-fi movie.
It felt like one to the scientists involved. On one side, you had the German school, led by guys like Robert Koch and Paul Ehrlich. They argued for humoral immunity. They said immunity was all about chemicals, antibodies floating in the blood. They thought cells were just bystanders.
And on the other side,
You had Mechnikov, the Russian working at the Pasteur Institute in Paris, arguing for cellular immunity. He was shouting, "No, it's the cells. The phagocytes are eating the bad guys."
he saw the body as a battlefield.
He did. And that mindset, the body as a battlefield, a constant struggle between invader and defender, is exactly what he eventually applied to aging. But we have to touch on his personal life to understand why he became so obsessed with death and aging. You mentioned he was a romantic.
A depressed romantic.
Very. He was born in Ukraine, near Kharkiv. He had a brilliant mind, but a turbulent emotional life. His career in Russia was plagued by student riots, bureaucratic red tape, and heavy anti-Semitism that hindered his colleagues. He felt stifled.
And his personal life was tragic.
And was. His first wife, Ludmila, died of tuberculosis. Mechnikov was devastated. He took a massive dose of opium to try and end his life.
But he survived.
He survived. He woke up, essentially. But then, years later, his second wife, Olga, contracted typhoid fever. Mechnikov was so despairing that he attempted suicide again. But this time, being a scientist, he did it in a very peculiar way.
How so?
He injected himself with relapsing fever.
He injected himself with a disease to commit suicide. That is scientifically dedicated, I guess.
It is tragic, but it speaks to his intensity. He wanted to die, but he also kind of wanted to see what the disease would do. He survived that too. And after that second survival, and after moving to Paris to work with Pasteur, he enters what he called his optimistic phase.
Optimistic for him, maybe.
Right. He turns his obsessive energy away from dying and toward living. He becomes obsessed with the question, why do we age? Why do we die? And he takes his hero, the phagocyte, the cell that protects the starfish, and he turns it into the villain.
This is the plot twist. The cells that saved the starfish are now the ones killing us.
In his theory of aging, yes. He theorized that as we get older, these macrophages, these big eaters, turn against the body. He described aging as a civil war.
A civil war inside the tissues.
Exactly. He categorized the body into noble elements and primitive elements.
Yeah.
The noble elements are the specific cells that do the hard work, the neuron in the brain, the hepatocyte in the liver, the kidney cell. These are high-level specialized workers.
And the primitive elements.
The connective tissue and the phagocytes, the structural stuff, and the immune system. Mechnikov believed that as we age, the noble cells get weaker and the primitive phagocytes get aggressive. They sense the weakness and they attack.
So the primitive stuff starts eating the noble stuff.
Yes. He even gave them names like a horror movie. He talked about neurophag cells that eat your nerves, osteophag cells that eat your bones, sarcophagus cells that eat your muscles. He believed that the senile degeneration we see, the memory loss, the muscle wasting, the brittle bones, was literally the immune system devouring the higher organs.
That is a terrifying image, but what triggers it? Why do the phagocytes suddenly go rogue?
This brings us back to the villain, the colon, and the theory of autointoxication.
So let's define this properly. Autotoxemia.
It literally means self-poisoning. Mechnikov proposed that the bacteria in the large intestine, specifically the putrefactive ones, the ones that break down proteins, are factories for poisons. When they break down food, they produce compounds like phenols, indoles, ammonia, and skatal.
The stuff that makes waste smell bad.
Right. And his theory was that these toxins don't just stay in the gut. They leak through the intestinal wall. They get into the bloodstream. And they do two things. One, they slowly poison the noble cells, weakening them. And two, they whip the phagocytes into a frenzy. They irritate the immune system, causing it to attack.
It's a double whammy. The gut poisons the brain, and the immune system finishes the job.
Precisely. And he didn't just guess this. He looked for proof in nature. He did this comparative biology analysis that is really quite clever, even if the conclusion was a bit off. He looked at birds versus mammals.
Okay, break that down. Why birds?
Well, he noticed that ruminants cows, sheep, have massive guts. They have huge amounts of intestinal putrefaction because they have to ferment grass. And they live relatively short lives for their size. Cow lives maybe 20 years.
But birds.
He looked at parrots, ravens, eagles. These are birds that can live 80, even 100 years. There were stories of parrots outliving their owners by decades.
Which is incredible when you think about it. A parrot has a heartbeat that is super fast, high metabolism, yet it outlives a cow.
And Mechnikov asked, what is the anatomical difference? He noted that these long-lived birds often have very short colons or, in his words, scanty intestinal flora. They didn't have that cesspool he hated so much. He actually wrote that their intestines had not the slightest smell of putrefaction.
So his logic was, short gut, no smell, live forever. Big gut, bad smell, die young.
That was the correlation. Less gut bacteria equals longer life.
Wow.
Which is ironic because today, modern science tells us we want more diversity in our microbiome. Mechnikov wanted to wipe it out, or at least wipe out the putrefaction.
So if you believe that your colon is a poison factory that is slowly killing you, what do you do about it? Mechnikov had a plan. In fact, he had a few plans. He called the ultimate goal orthobiosis.
Orthobiosis. It means correct living. Mechnikov believed the normal human lifespan, the genetic potential we all have, should be around 150 years.
150 years, that is optimistic.
He thought dying at 70 or 80 was a violent, premature death caused by this self-poisoning. He believed we were dying in middle age, essentially.
And he had this really philosophical idea about death, right? That if we reached 150, we wouldn't just die, we would want to die.
This is one of his most poetic ideas, the instinct for death. He looked at the mayfly. It lives for a day, reproduces, and dies without struggle. He believed that if we lived a full, natural cycle orthobiosis, we would eventually lose the will to live. We would develop a peaceful acceptance, a physiological instinct to end, just like the instinct to sleep at the end of a long day.
That is beautiful, but also a little terrifying. I've had enough, time to go. But to get to 150, we have to fix the gut. What was solution A?
Solution A was extreme.
Right.
It was the surgical approach. Enter Sir William Arbuthnot Lane.
Who was he?
He was a prominent Scottish surgeon who bought into Mechnikov's theory completely. He reasoned, if the colon is a cesspool causing autointoxication, and if we don't really need it, let's just take it out.
He removed people's colons to cure what? Cancer?
No, to cure intestinal stasis, to cure headaches, fatigue, malaise. He thought he was curing autointoxication by removing the poison factory. He performed hundreds of colectomies.
That sounds incredibly dangerous for the early 1900s.
It was horrifyingly dangerous. The mortality rate was something like 23% in one series. You have a 1 in 4 chance of dying just to cure your headaches. Mechnikov knew this. He acknowledged the logic. Subtract the colon, but he realized killing a quarter of your patients wasn't a sustainable path to longevity. He validated the theory, but he preferred solution B.
Which is the one he is famous for, the weed and feed approach.
Exactly. If you can't remove the organ, change the population living inside it. Mechnikov turned his gaze to the Balkans, specifically Bulgaria. He noticed demographic data suggesting there were pockets of people in rural Bulgaria living to extreme old age. Centenarians were common.
And what were they eating?
Sour milk.
Yogurt.
Massive amounts of it, every single day. Mechnikov analyzed this milk and found a specific bacteria, the Bulgarian bacillus. We know it today as Lactobacillus delbrueckii subsp. Bulgaricus.
And the mechanism, why did he think this worked?
He believed the lactic acid produced by these bacteria would acidify the gut, He thought the putrefactive bacteria, the ones making the toxins, couldn't survive in an acidic environment. So you flood the gut with good bacteria to starve out and fuel the bad bacteria. This was literally the birth of the probiotic industry.
It sparked a craze.
A massive craze.
Yeah.
Lactobacillium became a sensation. People were popping tablets, making yogurt at home. Mechnikov became a celebrity. He was the original biohacking influencer. But he also had a solution C, which is lesser known but relates to modern science in a really interesting way.
The serum.
Yes. Cytotoxic serum. This ties back to his Civil War theory. He and his colleagues developed serums by injecting human tissues into animals to create antibodies. The idea was to create a serum that would stimulate the noble tissues.
Wait, injecting antibodies that attack tissue to strengthen it? That sounds counterintuitive.
It is the principle of hormesis. The dose makes the poison. Large doses destroyed the tissue, but they found that small doses seemed to stimulate the tissue to repair itself. It is the same logic as exercise. You damage the muscle slightly so it grows back stronger. He was experimenting with this to rejuvenate the body.
So we have surgery, yogurt, and immune-stimulating serums. It sounds like he had it all figured out, but then...
The crash. The crash was hard. By the 1920s and 40s, after Mechnikov died, the theory of autointoxication was discarded. It was labeled pseudoscience.
Why? What changed?
A few things. First, physiologists realized that the symptoms of constipation, the headaches, the fatigue, weren't from toxins leaking into the blood. They were mostly mechanical.
Okay.
Yes. They did studies where they distended the rectum with a balloon, just pure pressure. And the patients got the symptoms immediately. As soon as the pressure was released, the symptoms vanished. That proved it was a nervous system reflex, not a slow-acting poison in the blood.
Okay, so the poison theory took a hit.
Also, they discovered that L. bulgaricus Mechnikov's miracle bug doesn't actually survive well in the human gut. It passes right through. So the specific mechanism he proposed fell apart. And then the quacks took over. Colonic irrigation, detox teas. The medical establishment ran away from anything that sounded like gut health because it smelled like fraud.
So Mechnikov becomes a footnote, the sour milk guy. But now we are in the 21st century, and we have the microbiome era.
And this is the resurrection. Modern science has pivoted back. We realized Mechnikov was wrong about the specifics. The colon isn't a cesspool, and the toxins aren't usually simple phenols, but he was spectacularly right about the principle.
The principle being that the gut regulates aging and health.
Exactly. We don't say autointoxication anymore. We say dysbiosis. We say leaky gut. We say inflammaging.
Inflammaging. I love that term.
It is the modern version of Mechnikov's phagocyte civil war. As we age, our immune system becomes chronically inflamed, attacking our own tissues. And where does that inflammation often start? The gut.
So he was right?
Yeah.
He just had the wrong vocabulary.
He was right. And now we have the tools to prove it. This is where we get to the stress test. We have 3 modern studies that take Mechnikov's ideas and apply 21st century rigor.
Let's start with the worms. This is the study involving Pediococcus acidilactici.
Correct. This is a 2022 study. Researchers took C. elegans, these tiny roundworms that are the workhorses of longevity research, and they fed them a specific bacteria, Pediococcus acidilactici, or PA.
And where did they find this bacteria?
Fermented pickles, specifically traditional pickles from China.
So Mechnikov had yogurt. These guys have pickles. What happened to the worms?
They lived significantly longer. But the deep dive is why. The researchers mapped out the molecular mechanism, and it validates Mechnikov's intuition in a surprising way.
So we have these microscopic worms living longer. Great. But why? In the summary, it mentions a gene called DAF16.
DAF16. If you follow longevity research, you see this name everywhere. It is a FOXP transcription factor.
Okay, transcription factor. Let's pause there. We hear that term a lot. What is it actually doing?
Think of your DNA as a massive library of instruction manuals, but most of those manuals are closed. They're sitting on the shelf collecting dust. A transcription factor is the librarian who walks over, pulls the specific manual off the shelf, opens it up, and shouts, "Build this."
Oh, it's a switch.
It is a master switch.
Yeah.
When DAF16 gets activated, in this case by the pickle bacteria, it moves into the nucleus of the cell. It enters the command center, and it turns on a whole suite of protective genes.
What kind of protection?
Primarily, it turns on a gene called SOD3. That stands for superoxide dismutase.
That sounds like a comic book villain weapon.
It is actually a hero. It cleans up rust. It scours the cell for reactive oxygen species, those free radicals that damage your DNA. So the bacteria in the gut sends a signal, DAF16 goes to the nucleus, and the cell starts scrubbing itself clean of rust.
That aligns perfectly with Mechnikov's idea of preventing decay. But looking at the study notes here, there's a curveball. the chloride channel surprise.
This is the part that blew my mind. The researchers found that none of this works. The DAF16, the rust cleaning, the longevity, if you delete a specific gene called CLES1A.
Which is a chloride channel.
Right. A tiny gate that lets chloride ions in and out of the cell.
Why does a longevity gene care about chloride ions?
Because chloride channels are deeply linked to the innate immune system. They help regulate inflammation. If these channels aren't working, the communication line between the bacteria and the host's immune system is cut.
So the bacteria isn't just giving nutrients, it is hacking the communication network.
Exactly. It is proving Mechnikov's oldest theory. The gut and the immune system are talking to each other, and they are using these chloride channels as the telephone line.
Mechnikov was the father of innate immunity.
Exactly. It links his two great loves, the gut and the immune system. The bacteria signal the immune system to dial down inflammation and dial up repair. It isn't detox in the sense of flushing out poisons. It is modulation. It is reprogramming the system.
Okay, that's worms. Worms are great, but I'm not a worm. Let's talk about mammals. Let's talk about the mice. And I have to be honest, when I read the title of this next study, I thought it was clickbait.
The glow-up study.
It sounds like a Men's Health magazine headline. Eat yogurt, get bigger testicles. I mean, come on. Is this real science?
It is absolutely real science, published in PLS1, which is a very respectable journal, rigorous methodology. But the results were so visual, so undeniable, that even the researchers were surprised.
Set the scene. We're looking at mice.
We have male mice. And normally, aging for a male mouse is not pretty. Just like in humans, things start to sag. Testicles shrink. It is called testicular atrophy. Testosterone plummets. They lose their fur quality. It is a steady decline.
And this is accelerated if they eat junk food.
Oh, absolutely. They gave some of these mice a new Western diet, high fat, high sugar, basically the standard American diet.
Yeah.
And these mice aged fast.
Enter the bacteria, Lactobacillus reuteri.
Now, L. reuteri is interesting because it is a natural inhabitant of the human gut, and it is found in high concentrations in breast milk.
So we have gone from pickles to breast milk bacteria.
The researchers were originally looking at obesity and cancer. They were feeding mice this L. reuteri yogurt, but they noticed something odd. The male mice on the probiotic looked fabulous.
Fabulous.
They had thick, luxuriant, shiny fur. They had a glow. And more scientifically, they had significantly larger testicles.
We keep saying significantly larger. Are we talking water weight?
Swelling. No. And that is the crucial distinction. They did the histology deep dive. They sliced the tissue and looked under the microscope. They looked at the seminiferous tubules.
The tubes where sperm is made?
Correct. In the probiotic mice, these tubes were preserved. They weren't shriveling up. They looked at the Leydig cells.
Remind us what Leydig cells do.
They are the factories. They are the cells inside the tests that manufacture testosterone. In the aged mice, these factories were shutting down. They were small, shriveled. But in the probiotic mice, the factories were booming. More cells, bigger cells, pumping out youthful levels of testosterone.
In a 12-month-old mouse, that is a geriatric mouse.
That is an old man mouse with the testosterone profile of a teenager.
Okay, that is the what. But the why is where this gets scary. Because the study says the shrinkage, the atrophy. It wasn't just aging, it was an attack.
This is the connection to Mechnikov's civil war, the researchers asked. What causes the shrinkage in the first place? They identified the culprit as interleukin-17, or IL-17.
An inflammatory cytokine.
Right. IL-17 is a pro-inflammatory signal. As the mice aged, or ate junk food, IL-17 levels went up, causing systemic inflammation that specifically targeted the testes.
The primitive phagocytes attacking the noble reproductive organs.
Exactly. It is Mechnikov's theory coming to life. But here is the proof. The L. reuteri naturally downregulated IL-17. It told the immune system to calm down. And to prove it was IL-17, the researchers did a separate experiment where they injected mice with an antibody to block IL-17 directly without the probiotic.
Yeah.
They got the same result, big testicles, high testosterone. This proves that the atrophy of aging wasn't inevitable wear and tear. It was an active immune attack. And the gut bacteria were able to stop that attack.
That is mind-blowing. It implies that what we think of as normal aging, losing muscle, losing drive, losing reproductive function, might just be a state of chronic, unchecked inflammation that our microbiome is supposed to be handling.
That is the aha moment. Mechnikov said, we are dying of disharmony. This study suggests that harmony is an immune system that isn't attacking its own organs, and the conductor of that harmony is the microbiome.
We have covered the chemistry, the insulin signaling, and the immunology, IL-17. But there is one more study that adds a physical dimension to this, because Mechnikov talked about fighting microbes with microbes.
Yes, and this third study brings in physics. It is about the flu, influenza A.
So we are moving from the gut to the lungs.
This represents the gut-lung axis. The study looked at lactobacillus again, but they changed how it was delivered. They compared aggregated bacteria versus dispersed bacteria.
What's the difference? Clumpy powder versus fine powder.
Basically, Mechnikov advocated for pure cultures. But in the real world, how you take probiotics matters. In this study, they found that when the bacteria were clumped together, which happens in a lot of standard powders or cheap supplements, they couldn't protect the mice from the flu.
Why not? They are the same bacteria.
It is a matter of access. To interact with the immune system, the bacteria need to reach the Peyer's patches.
Peyer's patches, those are the little immune command centers lining the gut, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
But the Peyer's patches are covered by a mucus layer and specularized M cells. Think of M cells as the doorbell to the immune system. If the bacteria are in big clunky aggregates, they physically cannot get through the mucus to ring the doorbell. They just float by and get pooped out.
So the dispersed bacteria worked better.
Significantly better. The dispersed bacteria treated to be separated were able to slip through the mucus and be taken up by the M cells. This triggered a cascade.
A cascade of what?
The mice produced more IL-12 and, crucially, more IgA antibodies.
IgA, those are the antibodies that protect mucosal surfaces, like the lungs.
Exactly. The mice fed the dispersed bacteria had lower viral loads in their lungs and higher survival rates.
So a bacteria in the gut told the immune system to send antibodies to the lungs to fight a virus, but only if the physics of the delivery allowed it to ring the doorbell.
It validates Mechnikov's idea that we can manipulate our resistance to infection through the gut. But it adds a layer of complexity he couldn't have seen. It isn't just eat yogurt. It is eat the right strain, delivered in the right way to signal the right immune pathway.
So bringing this all back to our original question, was Mechnikov a mad scientist or a prophet?
I think we have to give him profit. He was wrong about the cesspool. The colon is vital. He was wrong about autointoxication being simple poisons. But he was spectacularly right about the big picture.
That the gut drives aging.
Yes, that natural immunity is the key to longevity, and that we can manipulate our health by changing our bacteria. The shift has gone from detox, flushing things out, to modulation, putting good things in.
It is amazing to think he figured this out with a microscope and some starfish larvae without knowing about DNA or cytokines.
It is. And the practical takeaways for the listener are pretty clear. It isn't about purging. It isn't about extreme surgery. It is about feeding. Fiber, fermented foods. It is about realizing that inflammation is the enemy, and your gut bacteria are your primary allies in fighting it.
And it is about specific strains. We saw pediococcus for insulin signaling, L. reuteri for testosterone and anti-inflammation. It is becoming precise.
It is. We are moving toward precision probiotics.
I want to end on that philosophical note about orthobiosis. The idea of living so long and so well that you eventually just accept death.
It is a provocative thought. Mechnikov died at 71. He didn't reach his 150 years. But if we follow the science he started, if we can stop the violent aging of inflammation, stop the atrophy, keep our noble tissues healthy, will we actually reach that instinct for death? Or will we just stay youthful, full of testosterone and energy until the very end?
Maybe the goal isn't to want to die. Maybe the goal is just to never feel old until the moment we do.
I think Mechnikov would have been happy with that. His trillions of bacterial layers are certainly working on it right now.
They certainly are. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Go eat some pickles.
Some yogurt.
See you next time.